I'm Heather. After many wasted years trying outdated approaches to my daughter's addiction that felt wrong to me, harmed our relationship, and didn't help my daughter, I finally found an effective, evidence-based approach that repaired my relationship with her, helped me create my own peace of mind, and made me an ally in my daughter's recovery. I teach you a loving and compassionate approach to help you encourage change and create connection. Addiction impacts the entire family system. Family recovery is the answer. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to mention that this episode is being released on August 31st, 2022. Today is International Overdose Awareness Day. It's the world's largest annual campaign to end overdose, remember without stigma those who have died, and acknowledge the grief of the family and friends left behind. The campaign raises awareness of overdose, which is one of the world's public health crises, and stimulates action and discussion about evidence-based overdose prevention and drug policy. The campaign acknowledges the profound grief felt by families and friends whose loved ones have died or suffered permanent injury from drug overdose. International Overdose Awareness Day spreads the message about the tragedy of drug overdose death and that drug overdose is preventable. The goals of International Overdose Awareness Day are to provide an opportunity for people to publicly mourn loved ones in a safe environment, some for the first time without feeling guilt or shame. That just hit my heart because I've been lucky enough to be able to grieve publicly. Include the greatest number of people, International Overdose Awareness Day events, and encourage non-denominational involvement. To give community members information about the issue of fatal and non-fatal overdose. To send a strong message to current and former people who use drugs that they are valued. To stimulate discussion about overdose prevention and drug policy. To provide basic information on the range of support services that are eligible or available, to prevent and reduce drug-related harm by supporting evidence-based policy and practice, to inform people around the world about the risks of overdose. I did not expect that to make me feel emotional. That description came from overdose.com. And tonight, I'll be one of the speakers at the Volusia County Recovery Alliance 4th Annual Overdose Awareness and Remembrance Day in Daytona. I get to honor Helena and share her memory and share my experience with stigma around Helena's overdose. And I also get to share my encouragement and guidance for others who have lost loved ones. I've been working on that speech for the last week or so. It's probably why just reading that made me feel so emotional. And I mean, it's just hard for me to believe that Helena's gone, let alone that I'm sharing about it less than a year later. I'm going to record that speech and release it on the podcast, so it will be the next episode that comes out. And I wish I could say that I had planned ahead and scheduled today's episode because it aligns with overdose awareness, but I didn't. It was like divine intervention. I was supposed to have this episode on a couple of weeks ago, but I was deadlifting and I hurt my back pretty bad. I ended up in bed for about a week and I was in so much pain that there was no way that I could do an interview. So we had to reschedule, and the universe timed this perfectly for today. Today, I am interviewing author Susan Lynch. She wrote a book called Life After Kevin, A Mother's Search for Peace and the Golden Retrievers That Led the Way. I mean, it's got dogs in it. You know it's going to be good. It's a story about finding meaning when life challenges you in the hardest ways, healing through community, spiritual connection, and the transformation that comes from learning how to sit with intensely painful emotions to gain answers and clarity. That's what I got out of the book. Susan's son, Kevin, died from multiple drug intoxication in 2015. Susan didn't even know that Kevin had been using opiates before he died. And we don't know how often or anything else about it, just that he used them that night. She kept the cause of his death a secret for 2 years because of shame and stigma. And Susan and her husband were the only ones that knew. That means that she didn't get to talk to anybody about that. And I can't even imagine that. Shame keeps us separate, keeps us from getting help. It keeps us from community and connection. When things started getting really bad with Helena's substance use, shame kept me silent and isolated for a long time. So as soon as I heard that about her story, it just reminded me of my experience with that as well. And when I heard that she was writing a book about her experience, I knew it was just going to be something that we could all learn from. Susan Lynch has trained and competed with her golden retrievers for more than 20 years, and she's been an active member of the Golden Retriever Club of America and Yankee Golden Retriever Club since 1995. She previously sat on the Yankee Golden Retriever Club board of directors from 2008 to 2016 in the roles of director, vice president, and president. Her knowledge base covers both competitive and non-competitive American Kennel Club sports that include hunt tests, field trials, obedience trials, and conformation shows. Additionally, 4 of her dogs were active certified therapy dogs with Therapy Dogs International. In 2021, Susan was awarded the Rachel Page Elliott Featherquest Lifetime Achievement Award from the GRCA for her contributions to puppy education through Life with Rune, a Facebook group. I'm hoping I said that name right. It's spelled R-U-N-E. A Facebook group and community she founded. In Life with Rune, Susan demonstrated puppy socializing and training techniques that are critical from 8 weeks through 12 months. Susan is on a mission to use her own vast experience and expertise in dog training in her personal journey through a loss to support families in grief by showing them the power and depth of canine companionship during trauma. I hope you enjoyed this interview, and there will be links in the show notes for Susan's website and a way to pre-order the book. And you should go to her website and look at all the cute pictures of the dogs. And she's got a great video on there that shows a little bit of Kevin as well, too. I was really touched by the video. So go check that out after you listen to the interview. Hi, everybody. Today I am talking to Susan Lynch, author of the book Life After Kevin. Susan, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to start by taking a minute just to honor Kevin and have you just tell us a little bit about him so that we can kind of get the essence of him before we start just going into questions about the book.
Oh, I love that. So Kevin was hilarious. He kind of came out funny. He was just had that childlike personality that he never lost. He died when he was 25. So he still had that, I don't know, look at everything through rose-colored glasses. He was a lot of fun. He was no angel. He got himself into a fair amount of trouble, but he just had this quality that was so friendly and open that, yeah, he was something special.
Yeah, that's why I want to take a minute to just get to feel the essence of him before we start talking about this book, because without him, we wouldn't be learning what we're going to learn from you today. So I just want to honor that. So a big part of your early story after Kevin died was dealing with the shame and the impact that shame had on your grieving process. And I know, like, what I experienced in my early days of, like, when I was just dealing with Helena's addiction, but the shame kept me very separate and made everything harder than it had to be. It was hard enough without it, especially dealing with grief. So how did shame impact your grieving process?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, shame is definitely isolating. I didn't know that Kevin was doing opiates when he was alive. So when I found out that was how he died, it was something I had to process. And I was not ready to make that public before I did my inner work to be able to heal that and then come out about it. So I intentionally kept it under wraps for quite a while. I did for 2 years. And it was a heavy, heavy, heavy load to carry. And that's a big part of what I write about in the book is that experience with shame is what keeps everybody suffering in silence.
Yeah. And shame grows in silence and stigma grows in silence.
Yep.
And it, like you said, my burden was so much heavier before when I was keeping that secret. And it just made me feel so much worse, so much heavier. How do you think it caused your grieving process or I mean, there's always going to be grief there because of the nature of the loss, but do you think that it made it more intense for longer because of the secret that you were carrying?
Oh, absolutely. It's complicated grief, right? So I had to deal with the fact that he had died, which is monumental in itself. And then how he died. People are always ready to make assumptions or judgments. And it definitely, I even found it to be like that in some grief groups where people would offer up more sympathy to people whose kids had died from no fault of, as they say, making air quotes, no fault of their own kind of thing, and diseases and such. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said diseases and such, because a lot of people who die from an overdose are dealing with the disease of addiction. But people don't even think about it that way. They put it in the choice category.
Right. I meant physical diseases.
I know, but it still goes to what a lot of people think about with or relating it back to choice, but we don't minimize the tragedy of somebody who died in a car accident because they were speeding, or somebody who died from a heart attack because of lifestyle choices they made, right? We don't bring it down to choice for anything but addiction. Not we, me, and you, but when we're stigmatizing.
Yeah.
I think that's what keeps us in the shame and silence is people looking at it like a choice like that.
Absolutely. Yep.
So you had a couple of experiences with stigma while you were still processing the grief and processing the shame. You were still keeping things a secret when there was the time that somebody made the comment about the singer from Stone Temple Pilots dying and that there's just one more addict off the streets.
Yeah.
And then somebody else mentioning at a training you were at that family dinners would fix the opioid crisis.
Nice and simple.
Yeah. And it's no surprise that on the second one, you ended up yelling at that person, right?
Yeah.
You want to tell us that story a little bit so we can hear the background and then talk about how, after that, how you respond to stigma today?
Yeah. So the first one, I was at work when Scott Weiland, the lead singer for Stone Temple Pilots, had died. And I hadn't had the toxicology report back yet. So I was a little bit nervous. I was suspicious, but I wasn't sure. And this guy just said, "Oh, one more drug addict off the street." And I was like, and I was still in that. It was really my first experience with somebody being so completely ignorant and saying it to my face without knowing what he was saying. Well, he knew what he was saying, but he didn't know what I was feeling. So and I just kept quiet about that. And then by the time I had I was in hospice training, and ironically enough, people are supposed to be so compassionate.
Right.
And I was at a table with 25 people, and there was the volunteer coordinator was saying that they needed more people to volunteer because of the opiate crisis, and a lot of kids' parents were dying. So they needed more volunteers for the children's grief support group. And that was when the comment was made, "Well, we know we're just what would solve the opiate crisis would be more family dinners. And it was just like, it was a year, probably about a year and a half of stuffing it all down. And I just exploded. And I couldn't, it was so cavalier and ridiculous. And I just was like, you have no right to say that. I made family dinners. And when I think about it now, I kind of cringe because I was like defending myself. Like if that was even worthy of me saying, oh my God, I made family dinners. We had the protein, the starch, and the vegetable on the plate. We talked about this, so it was reacting. I hadn't really gone completely through my inner work, clearly, because I was reacting and I was very upset.
Yeah. It takes a lot not to respond or not to react to something like that. And then the intense pain you were already experiencing because of living with so much shame and secrecy, I probably would have reacted the same way. I mean, and there's been times where I've experienced stigma now that probably the only reason I've been able to respond intentionally is because I knew these things ahead of time, right? Like I knew other people's stories and experiences. I almost feel like, I know that this sounds crazy, but like I was being prepared like a little bit at a time for what I was going to experience after Helena died. Like a client just happened to bring up to me like a family that lost their child and they were in secrecy about it. And I made the decision like in that moment not to be in secrecy if anything happened to Helena. And this was only like a month before she died.
Wow.
And so it was like, and then I saw this post about somebody talking about the way we treat addiction versus the way we treat other diseases and comparing it. And can you imagine if we did those things? And that was just like a week before I had a horrible conversation with a police officer who was wanting to make sure that I knew my daughter died because of her choices, not because somebody had sold her a lethal dose of fentanyl when she thought she was buying heroin. He wanted to make sure that I really listened up and could hear that she died because of her choices to break the law. And I was able to stay calm in that moment because I had just seen that post. It's like, we're going to talk about signs a little bit more, but
yeah,
I was able to stay calm in those moments. So I can't even imagine if I had not been able to talk about things and let off some of the pressure, I would have completely exploded. So I totally understand that.
Yeah. I remember when the police officer called me back. We had been playing phone tag. This was a few months after I got the toxicology report back. And I remember being in a store, walking around, because I didn't want to miss his call, walking around the store and trying to explain to him how funny he was and what a great person he was. And he was just not wanting to hear any of it. And I thought, again, this was another cringe-worthy moment. And I think of myself, why was I trying to change this person's mind to just considered him a statistic at that point? It's amazing that police don't have more compassion, or in some circumstances, than they do dealing with a family. That's horrifying what you went through. I can't even. Ugh.
Yeah, and it's just so important I don't think I changed his mind at all.
Right.
But I at least felt good about how I showed up in that situation. And the same thing with you. Like, it's only natural for us to want to defend our kids and humanize them. They're not just a statistic.
Well, that's exactly how I show up now. I choose to lead in this battle by writing about Kevin. And I think that if you tell stories, and if I share stories there's a lot of flashbacks in my book where by the time you finish the book, the reader has a clear understanding of who Kevin was as a person. And he's not painted as an angel or anything. It's very true to who he was. And I also, on the flip side, talk about what I went through with all of that shame and stigma. So I think that by telling these stories, it's harder for people to think of him as a statistic. And it puts a face. It, like you said, it humanizes it. It puts a face to the overdose. And because you can't change how people feel. You can only give them something to think about, right?
Yeah, planting seeds.
Right.
Just very similar to what I thought of with my daughter when I was trying to support her, and even in our relationship was just like planting these seeds and cultivating them with connection. And hopefully we can plant seeds by telling the story of our kids and humanizing them and letting people see how much more they were than their addiction.
Absolutely.
So then after that incident, or those couple of incidents where you dealt with stigma, it was not too long after that before you were creating community and a support group, trying to come out of that isolation and shame. And that was what ended up getting you to start sharing with everybody that Kevin had died from an overdose.
Right.
So you want to share that part of your story?
Yeah, so there's a fantastic group called Helping Parents Heal, and they are based in Arizona. I live in Southern New Hampshire. I was doing a lot of the online classes, and there wasn't any in-person groups near me. So I decided to become an affiliate leader, and I secured the location, and I needed to get some media around it. And so I contacted a newspaper. It was like a free paper that went to a bunch of surrounding towns. And I asked if they would be willing to do a feature. And she said yes. She came to my house. She was here for like about an hour and a half. We had a decent conversation. And at the end, I had all the picture boards out. She asked me a ton of questions. And at the end, she said, "How did Kevin die? We didn't discuss that." And I said, "Well, technically he died from multiple drug intoxication, but I don't want you to print that because I have not told my family and friends." Now, this was 2 years after he had died. And she said, okay. And she left. And I had emailed her right afterward. And I said, just asking her about when it was going to be in the paper. And she emailed me back pretty quickly. And she said, "Susan," well, I memorized what she said. She said, "Well, I can appreciate what you're trying to do. Without listing the cause of death, it leaves a large and unacceptable hole in the story. And without it, we can't print your story." And I saw red. I was so angry. I couldn't even contain it. I completely flipped out. I was scared at how upset I was. And I kept asking myself, why am I so mad? Why am I so mad? And it brought up something from 10 years ago that Kevin had gone through. He had been arrested for underage drinking, and he had made the front page of a bigger newspaper. And all of the shame and stigma I had felt with that. And I saw that it was very clear of the similarities between these two situations. And I thought it was just I was at a complete crossroads. And I'm like, I could either keep going the way I'm going and keep stuffing it and keep hiding it and keep being secretive, or I could just come out and let people know how he died. And I know Kevin wanted that healing for me, and I did. And I always think of her, I thought she was going to be the person that helped me get the group going. But in fact, she actually helped me really let go of the chip on my shoulder from 10 years ago that turned into this giant boulder. And I didn't even realize it. And so it was just such a healing moment for me to finally come out.
So that led to you telling everybody in your family, which I think it's amazing that your husband kept that secret for you. I try to put myself in his position, and it's amazing that he was able to do that, because I don't know if I would have been able to if my
Yeah.
spouse had made that request of me. So I just have to give him a lot of credit for doing that.
He was wonderful. And that just kind of speaks to how two people grieve differently. He didn't feel that stigma. And I mean, he felt the stigma, but he didn't really go down the shame hole like I did, because I'm the mother. You're the mother, and it's like just kind of falls on us. But he really wanted to do what he could to support me, and he knew how important it was to me. But yeah, he was wonderful. And I really didn't realize the magnitude of what I asked him until I said, I'm willing to tell people.
Yeah, that's amazing. But I want to hear the rest of what you ended up doing with the newspaper, because you told her how you felt about it, and you used it as a catalyst to start changing, get community, come out of this isolation and shame. But you also stood your ground on the article, which I really loved.
Yeah, I told her that people judge how much sympathy they get based on how a person dies. And I didn't want to perpetuate that. And it was also not about how Kevin died. It was about support for parents who had lost a child. That's really what the story was about. So she needed that little salacious detail to sell papers. And I did not give her permission to use that. So she wasn't able to write the story.
Yeah, I love that, because saying that there was a large and unacceptable hole in the story without his cause of death completely misses that the purpose of the group was to create community around any death. Or loss of a child. It doesn't matter how they died. It just matters what we're experiencing as parents in that loss.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm glad that you stuck by how you felt about that. But I'm also glad that it was an opportunity to open up for you and really experience that healing that you needed. So then, after you started telling everybody, how much did that help you? Because I know that that's something that I really struggled with by the time Helena died, everybody knew everything about my life because I already had a podcast and everything. But when I first started sharing what was happening in my home and in my life, it was this huge relief for me. How much did that open up healing for you?
Oh, absolutely. Well, so when you're hiding, you're trying to avoid situations. You're micromanaging how you never know if somebody is going to ask you that question. You don't know if you should tell somebody that your child just died because they're going to say, what happened? How did they die? So just letting go of that, trying to micromanage everybody and trying to control the conversation it just freed up so much of my brain power so I could really concentrate on myself and my grief, because that was almost put on hold because I was dealing with all of the stigma and the shame and stuff, that part of it. So yeah, it just was like I lost 100 pounds of weight off of my shoulders. It was wonderful.
Yeah. I read in a book once, it was Dark Side of the Light Chasers, and she compared it to just having any kind of secret like that, like carrying around like an orange. Like, it's not heavy, but if you're carrying it around trying to hide it all day, every day, holding on to it, like just the burden that would create in your life. And I thought that was a really good example. Like, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that big of a deal, but when you really think about how exhausting it would be trying to hide that orange, you didn't want anybody to know you had it, but you were carrying it around.
Well, the thing is, it's like you just don't ever know when that shoe's going to drop. Like, you don't know if you're going to run into somebody and at the store. So you don't want to go to the store. So you end up isolating yourself more. I mean, it's just this vicious cycle that you stay in, and that hypervigilance. It's just exhausting. It's really exhausting.
Yeah. I ended up posting on Facebook that Helena died the same night that I found out that she died, because I couldn't even stand the thought of telling one more person or the thought of telling people that I hadn't seen in 3 months. And then suddenly they reach out to me and then I've got to tell them. I'm like, I just want everybody to know right now so
Right.
that I never have to say it again. And to me, just even the thought of the burden of dealing with even that part of it, I can't even imagine how big of a burden that was for you to carry that for 2 years.
Well, I just sent out, I use my social media platform and I have a puppy group and I have emails from that. So I just sent out an email yesterday or the day before about International Overdose Awareness Day, which is August 31st. And in it, I talked about how Kevin died. And so I got that out to whatever, a couple thousand people. And it felt good to be able to let more people know and to kind of shine a light on it, what I went through, not super in depth, but I got feedback. I got feedback from people that replied and said, thank you for writing that. My son is struggling right now and it's so hard. And so it was nice. It wasn't a lot, but there was a significant amount of people that appreciated talking about it. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a need for it out there.
Talking about it is very healing for me. Just being able to talk openly about it. And I'm going to be at an overdose awareness event, like sharing my story on the 31st. It'll be the first time I've shared it in front of people in that way. So that'll be interesting. But I do think that the more we talk about it, the more we normalize what
Right.
people experience and humanize the narrative around addiction.
I put a picture in there of college drop off day. And it was Kevin, like, he just looked so handsome in the picture. And it was like, this was his plan. His plan was to go to college. His plan was to have a career and have a family and all that. And this is what anybody else this time of year is what they're doing with their college age kids. They're dropping them off at college. So I chose that picture intentionally to, again, normalize it and say, yes, look at this was our plan too.
Yeah, it could happen to anybody.
Right. Yep.
So your dogs are part of the book and a big part of your healing journey. And me too. Like I've got my daughter's dog. That dog's like my my life now. And I have two other dogs, and just the healing power that dogs have is just so amazing to me. How did your dogs help you heal?
So I was a competitive dog trainer for over 20 years. So I had two dogs, two golden retrievers at the time, and they were used to training 5, 6 days a week and plus going on hikes in the woods every day. So they were used to a lot of exercise. And when Kevin died, we went from that to a short walk in the woods every day. So very first day, they mirrored my grief. It was amazing. We were in the house and they would just lie at my feet. It was like they energetically just knew. They would follow me from room to room. But then when we would go out on walks, they were able to enjoy themselves. The tails were wagging, they were sniffing, they were having rolls on the grass. And I thought it took me a long time to figure it out exactly what it was, but they were the perfect embodiment of balance. They were able to show me how to acknowledge and take the time to process my grief, but yet enjoy what's right in front of me when I'm out in nature and the beauty that's around me. So for me, they were like my first teachers on what I wanted to be like. I wanted to be able to acknowledge my grief, but I don't want to live there, right?
Yep.
I want to be able to enjoy what's in front of me. And they guided me through that heavy, heavy, heavy early grief. And then they got to a point where they were like my reset button every day. One of my dogs was the first one that got me to laugh again. And it was just like a refocus on how I wanted to be each morning.
Yeah, I love that. My dog makes me laugh like at least at some point every day.
Yeah.
That is even, I mean, I could have been crying 5 minutes before that and she'll make me laugh because
Yeah.
she's just so silly. And yeah, I don't know what I would do without her.
And laughing is such a huge part, I think, of healing. It helps us. I did a grief workshop one time with Paul Dennison, who's great. He's got these videos and he's like, grief sets up in the body. So we were at this workshop and he said, I want you to fake laugh. And we're all like, oh God, please don't make me do this. Right. And just that idea, it got us to laugh like genuinely, right? It'd be like, ha 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 ha. And then we started laughing at him. And it's just such a nice relief. So it's such a gift. So to be able to have something that I live with that makes me laugh every day was just total bonus.
Yeah. And it's part of you said like acknowledging what you're experiencing, but not living in the pain of it all of the time.
Right.
And I think that was something I also had learned, like dealing with Helena's addiction, that because it was so intense, acknowledging that experience, but also not living there and experiencing all the emotions. And then what's been even surprising to me in my grief is that I can be crying 1 minute and feel just the intense ache of the loss and how the depth of it. And then like the dog will do something silly and I'm laughing and I feel great joy at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's very healing to allow that because to me, that's what keeps me connecting to Helena in love instead of only grief and pain.
Right. It's like they give you permission to enjoy the laughter. Because if I didn't have my dogs, I think I would be more heavily in the grief part of it. But the dogs were a reminder each day. It's like a reset. Oh yeah, we can do this. We can have moments of joy. We can have moments of laughter. So
yeah. Okay. And so then you also talk about connecting with Kevin now, like spiritually.
yeah.
And what I love about that, because I'm doing the same thing, trying to learn how to connect with Helena spiritually, is that it really parallels me learning to try to connect with her when she was dealing with addiction. Like it was different. I couldn't connect with her on the same level. Nothing that worked before worked, and I had to figure out a whole new way to do it. And now, again, nothing that worked before works. I'm having to figure out this whole new way to do it again. So, how did you come into that, and how has that connection with him helped you?
So I was I started going in Kevin's room every day, and it was a place for me to completely come undone. And I needed that privacy. And I created a space in there. I had a little table, I had a candle, I had notebook and pen, and some essential oils. And I just looked out the window and I just started talking to him. Like I pretended like we were on the phone. I mean, we talk to our kids all the time, right? So, and we don't see them when we're on the phone. So I just started doing that. And then I would pause, like if I asked him a question or if I told him something and I was done, I would just pause and see if I felt something in my body or if something came to me. And if I was really stuck, I started thinking or imagining what he would say. And I could just see him in my mind's eye. And if I asked him a question or something, I knew him so well, I could almost imagine what he would say. So, and then I would start writing it down. I think that was a big part of it because when you physically write something on paper, you're making it real, right? You're taking your thought or what is in the ether and you're making it real on paper. And I think to me, it sends out that energetically into the universe that you want more. So it's just that kind of process. And I also I had divination cards. I used divination decks. I have this one Talking to Heaven,
Mm.
Doreen Virtue, and James Van Prague. And those are great because it's just a deck of cards, and I would just shuffle them, and I would hold the deck, and I would say, Kev, what do you want to tell me today? And then I would fan them out, and I would just intuitively pick a card. And then sometimes that would be even enough to kind of just start the conversation. Maybe there's one card in there that has a bunch of animals, and I'm with all the animals, and it's like, of course you are, and house trip, and so I would just start talking to him like I would here, and it was amazing how that just kind of snowballed and got easier and easier for me and more normal, and I made a point to do it every day.
And that was a big part of your healing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really very similar to me, like what started my transformation in Helena's addiction, like when I was finally ready to face everything and try a different way and being willing to do whatever it took to have a relationship with her. I wasn't necessarily talking to her, but I was having that meditative time, seeing what came up and responding to it and learning from it. And it really improved our relationship. And it's interesting that because I was thinking about like how I'm connecting with Helena now, and sometimes it's easy because I'm in a really good place. But when I am feeling like desperate because I'm feeling a lot of grief and I really like am desperate to connect with her so I can feel better instead of being centered in myself. It's very similar to how it was when she was alive. Like I'm not going to get a connection with her during that time.
Yeah.
And then it just pushes me to focus on myself again, which is so important. It's like, I think the biggest part of anything that I've learned is always going inside of myself and finding that balance. But it's the exact same connection that I'm having with her spiritually. It's like all the same rules apply.
Right. Right. I use a lot of like when I go out in nature, if I see a hawk, or like I showed up to a trail recently, and I always think of which trail am I going to walk on today, because I have like 85 miles of trail around my house. I'm very fortunate that way. And I showed up at this trail, and right at the trailhead, there was a post, and there was a huge hawk just sitting there as I pulled up. And I thought, well, I intuitively wanted to go to this trail. There's the hawk. And then I'd start talking to Kev. I'm like, okay, Kev, hawk is a messenger. And then I'd be like, remind me when I get home. So it's like he's right next to me. I'm telling him, like, remind me when I get home. I got to look up in the book, like, what the message would be. And if you have an idea and you want to let me know, let me know. And then I might be on my walk and something might come to me, and I know it's from him. I know it's from Kevin. So it's like these little things. It doesn't have to directly be like, okay, Kevin, I'm asking you this question. I want you to answer me. Sometimes it kind of comes in the back door through the hawk, or through, I had 7 squirrels in my front yard, which is so odd. Anything like that just kind of get your attention, pay attention to it, because they might be trying to come in through something else. So.
Yeah. And that really, like, I was doing that before she died. So it helped me to keep doing it afterwards. But then sometimes it is harder because it's just the emotional aspect of it still. But a lot of times when I'm walking and talking to her, and like I'll ask a question, or I'll say, well, I think this, and I'll see a feather, and I'm like, oh, thank you. There's my answer.
Yes. And that's another good point that you brought up. You said, thank you. I always tell people it's really important to thank them. When you get something, acknowledge it, because they're just as happy that you were able to get the message. So thank them, and it just sends that energy out there again, that they will be coming to you again soon.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And then, I mean, this can be with any loved one, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, I haven't lost a child, but any loved one that you want to communicate with, or just even have more of a spiritual connecting, getting outside and really looking within. I mean, that's been the biggest part of my healing. How about you?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Going within, I had to heal all of the old beliefs. I call it trying on my own old life to see what fits. So I had to rule out things that I don't believe anymore, outdated beliefs, outdated things that I enjoy that I don't enjoy anymore, to see what my new life is going to be like, and to be open to experience instead of saying, no, I can't do that. Like, well, maybe I could try that. So I think being open also pertains to signs and, messages from loved ones. It's like, be open to how you receive something. I remember asking Kevin one time, I said, I asked him for a ring. I said, I want you to send me a ring. I don't care how I get it. I just want a ring. And I wasn't expecting a ring to show up from Amazon or something. And I was at a doctor's office, I was looking through a magazine, and I saw an ad for the Monopoly game, board game. And there was the picture of luxury tax with the gold ring.
Oh, wow.
In the magazine. And I was like, thank you. So it's just such a nice, bright spot to know that they can hear you and that they're listening and want to connect with you.
Yeah. I think my very favorite one was, I was at the beach, and it was this beach in Sarasota that was her and I had gone to. It was both of our favorite beach. And so I was there and I was standing in the water, and I was like, I really want to see a dolphin. That was my challenge to her that day. And I was expecting to see, because sometimes you see them way out on the buoys beyond where people are supposed to swim. And literally 10 minutes later, everybody around me is making all this noise. And I turn around and look, and there's 5 dolphins within a couple of feet of me, way in where all the people were swimming.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I was like, you just really over delivered there,
Wow. Oh my God. That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So I think that the more open you are to that, and it just allows some joy into my life.
Absolutely. Yep. And write it down. I have a thick binder of signs that I've gotten, and some were that I've forgotten. And so on a hard day, I might look through that just as a pick me up and be like, you know what? I'm going to get another sign. Look at all of these signs that I've gotten. So Tom and I were shopping at the Gap of all places. And I was waiting at the entrance of the dressing room, and he was trying on pants, and I looked up, and there was a poster, and it was just the waist to the knee of a pair of jeans. And it had the Golden Gate Bridge embroidered on it. And it said Frisco, which is where he lived out in California. And then underneath and there's this epic picture of him at the Golden Gate Bridge with his brother. And underneath it said Kevin Jean.
Wow.
And I went to the clerk and I said, because I wanted to buy a pair. And I said, is there such a thing? Where's the Kevin Jean? And she goes, no, I don't know. That's just some random ad. But I looked up and I was like, what? Oh my God. So it's amazing how they just and you got to think that they're laughing, right?
Absolutely.
How cool is that? 5 dolphins.
Right.
You wanted one, I sent you 5, right? A few feet from you.
Yeah. I can just see her laughing, because you described Kevin's a lot like Helena, and she would have been like, come on, Mom, this is so easy.
Yeah. Boom.
Exactly. So I think another part of the transformation, at the end of your book, you have questions, which I absolutely love questions. I think it's because you also mentioned like questioning your beliefs and figuring out what fits you today versus before. And I went through that once, like early on in Helena's addiction with it, when I really started changing as a person. I'm like right in the middle of it now. I'm not really, I know parts of my old belief system don't work, but I don't have a new one yet. I'm like still too early in the process, but I love the questions that you asked. And one of them was, so you just talked about like sitting in Kevin's room, and you point out that sitting in the pain is how you feel, which is an important part of what a parent has to do when they're dealing with addiction, is tolerating the discomfort of all of the intense emotions without really responding to them, or like not reacting and waiting till they can respond intentionally. So how has just even sitting in that pain helped you heal?
Well, I think that so much of our lives are trying to keep our emotions in check. So whether it's at work or the grocery store or out in public or whatever. So I needed a place where I could completely come undone. And that's what I did. And I went into Kevin's room. I would take in pictures. I would listen to his music. I would do anything to intentionally cry. And people might say, oh, well, of course, it's going to be easy to cry. Your son died. But to really let it go, because I didn't want to cry in front of Tom, because my husband, because I didn't want him to think he needed to comfort me. And so just to completely have privacy and to come undone and to sit with and acknowledge all of the losses, because it's not just the loss of the person, right? I would never see him get married. I would never see his children. I would never see him be at his work or get promotions or whatever. All of those are those micro losses that I needed to acknowledge. And it just felt right to sit with that and to acknowledge it and not turn away from it. I loved him so much. Of course, I'm going to feel so much pain, and it just didn't seem right. And I just trusted my intuition, and it was the right thing. And I think by sitting in the pain, it freed up tears, it freed up emotions, and to create space to do other things that day, right? Yeah. So I would go in Kevin's room. I would say, okay, I'm going to sit in his room for an hour or 2 hours or whatever it was in the morning. And then I would come out completely spent, right, from crying and everything. But I'd be like, okay, I've freed up some space. I can take the dogs out for a walk now, or I can call my mom, or I could do whatever. And I think that if we're walking around just completely full up with emotions, teetering, and any little thing, any little bump, any little look that somebody gives us is just going to completely make me lose my crap. Yeah. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to feel so out of control all the time. And so it was a way for me to kind of take a little bit of control of my own healing. And so I found that to be like the number one thing that helped me, was to, ironically, force myself to face it, and I brought in all the props to make me do it. Yeah. Music was usually the one thing that was like 100% guaranteed that would make me cry.
Yeah, I'm the same way. And I think that it really is important. It's okay not to be okay, for one. It's like when my father died, I learned all the ways not to. I thought back about that after Helena died, because when my father died, I didn't cry in the first year, or I cried maybe just a little bit. And then I really stuffed my grief down. And then it took then when it started coming up, I couldn't hold it down anymore. And then I had about 3 years of feeling pretty out of control with my grief. But still trying to resist it. So the more I resisted it, the longer it stuck around. So I was very intentional about not doing that to myself again. Because I also, when I had to cry, I would go hide until I could push it down and I wasn't going and like creating an intentional space to cry. I was going and getting away from anybody who could see me. And so I could push it down and hide it. And then, so now I'm like, I just cry anywhere. I've cried the whole time I was lifting weights at the gym. I don't even know how many times. Out on the place where I walk, driving my car. I'll sit here and work, like if not when I have a client, but if when I'm writing or whatever I'm doing and just cry, but I can still keep getting things done. That's the biggest thing that I've learned is how much I can get done while I'm still crying. But I decided this time around that I would not do that to myself, that I'm going to let it all out because I don't want all those toxic emotions building up in my body, like you said, like where I'm about to explode or creating disease in my body from it.
Right. Oh, yeah. I remember being at work before I came out with it. And I worked for a veterinary office. So any euthanasia or anything like that, it was like, it's like really hard. And I was always dashing into the bathroom and just like trying to compose myself again so I could go back out. And that's that putting on a face. It's so hard. And it's just that's just the way we as a country grieve what's expected of us. Okay, you got a couple of days, now you should be past it and you got to get back to work. And so I needed that release every day. And when I didn't do it, it was interesting because if I didn't do it, I would be blindsided way more often by my grief. So like you said, it was like an intentional way to heal, as crappy as it is. It's no fun, but you keep stuffing it down. It's not going anywhere.
No,
it's not going anywhere. And it manifests in different, physically in your body, emotionally.
Yeah. And it's the same thing, like any parent that's dealing with addiction, like there's the grief of losing what you expected life to be like, even though your child is still there. There's the grief of what you expected parenting to be like, what you expected your child's life to be like, how this impacts all the other areas of your life. So grieving all of those losses is really important too, taking the time to be intentional with crying about it, letting it out. Like grief is so much more than comes up for so many more things than death. So everything that we've talked about, I think can be applied to so many other situations in our life where grief is needed to reach acceptance of where we're at in our life.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking about this wedding I went to. So all of Kevin's friends are at the marrying age, right? So he would be like 33, right? He just had a birthday. And I was at a wedding this summer in Florida, very big wedding. And I'd say like 65% of the people that went were kids in their early 30s. And it's been almost 7 years for me. And it was really hard. It was like, I think the first time I saw like what he might have been doing at this age, at this time. And I was absolutely miserable at the wedding. And I honored it. I mean, I stayed on the periphery and I didn't go out afterward to the parties and stuff. And I just stayed in my room and I just said, you know what? I said to my husband, I'm like, I'm having a really hard time with this. I need to process it and not put a phony face on. And I did. And I was glad when it was over, but I was also glad the way I responded to it instead of just trying to fake my way through it.
Yeah, you honored it. And then a lot of times I'm like, yeah, of course I feel this way right now. Just giving myself that reassurance that however I feel is okay, which is another thing that like helps it to pass through easier than totally resisting it or trying to chalk myself out of it. Like, yeah, of course I feel that way right now.
Right.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed you sharing this. The book was really just a beautiful read. I really enjoyed all of hearing about your family and learning about Kevin and the dogs and how you processed your grief. I think it's a really beautiful story. So thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want to learn more about my work, go to heatherrosscoaching.com. If you want to help other parents who are struggling with a child's addiction, you can do it two different ways. First, you can share the podcast with them directly, or you can share it on your social media. Second, you can leave a review. Talk to you next week.